Not a city. An empire. A living political organism with armies and laws and taxes and an idea of itself so durable that it outlasted every enemy that came to destroy it: the Mongols, the Arabs, the Persians, the Bulgarians, the Crusaders, the Seljuk Turks, wave after wave of the most formidable forces the ancient and medieval worlds produced. And for 1,000 years, against all of them, it held. The night of May 28, 1453, in the city of Constantinople, the largest and most magnificent cathedral in the world is lit with candles from floor to ceiling. The Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, built 900 years before this night, is packed with people. Soldiers in armor, civilians with nowhere else to go, priests conducting what everyone in that room understands is the final liturgy of an empire. The man kneeling at the altar is the Emperor Constantine the 11th Palaiologos. He is 59 years old. Outside the walls of his city, 80,000 Ottoman soldiers are waiting for dawn. He knows what dawn will bring. Every dispatch from the walls has told the same story: the defenses are failing. The reinforcements are not coming. And the largest cannons ever built are reducing the Theodosian walls, walls that had stood for 1,000 years, to rubble. Section by section, hour by hour. Constantine the 11th has already sent his family away. He has already written his farewells. He has refused every offer of safe passage. Earlier this evening, he removed his imperial regalia, embraced his closest companions, and asked their forgiveness for anything he had done to offend them. Then he went to the walls. He would be found there the next morning, or rather, he would never be found at all. His body was never definitively identified. The last emperor of the Roman Empire simply disappeared into the final battle for his city and was never seen again. That is how this story ends. The question this video is going to answer is how it began. How a small city on a narrow strait of water between Europe and Asia became, for 11 centuries, the center of the civilized world. How the same empire that Constantine the Great founded in 330 CE survived the fall of Rome, survived the Arab conquests, survived the Crusades, survived the Black Death, and survived more political assassinations and palace coups than any political system in history, and yet kept functioning. Kept producing art and law and theology and trade. Kept calling itself Roman long after the Rome it descended from had become a ruin. This is the story of the Byzantine Empire. It is the story of how the ancient world ended and the modern world began. And it starts not in Constantinople, but with a single man who looked at the wrong place and saw everything. The gamble. Constantine moves Rome to the edge of the world, 306 to 337 CE. In the year 306 CE, the Roman Empire was not one empire. It was four. For decades, the system known as the Tetrarchy, 4 emperors ruling 4 quadrants of an empire too large for any single man to govern, had kept the Roman world from flying apart entirely. It had not kept it from being consumed by near-constant civil war, bled white by plague and economic collapse, or losing great swaths of frontier territory to peoples it could no longer afford to fight. But it had kept the administrative skeleton functioning. Into this world of fracture and exhaustion, Constantine was born around 272 CE. His father was one of the 4 emperors. His mother Helena was a woman of uncertain origin, possibly already a Christian. Certainly remarkable, as her son's story would demonstrate. In 312 CE, marching on Rome to fight his rival Maxentius, Constantine reportedly experienced something at the Milvian Bridge, a vision, a sign, that convinced him the Christian God was on his side. He had the Chi Rho symbol painted on his soldiers' shields. He won the battle. Maxentius drowned in the Tiber River. Whether Constantine actually converted to Christianity at that moment, or whether he was doing what extremely intelligent political operators have always done, identifying the most energetic, most organized, most ideologically coherent movement in his empire and aligning himself with it, historians argue to this day. What is beyond dispute is the consequence. The Edict of Milan in 313 CE gave Christians throughout the empire the right to practice their faith openly. The most persecuted minority in the Roman world became, within a generation, its dominant religion. But the decision that would shape the next 1,000 years was not religious. It was geographic. By the early 320s, Having unified the empire under his sole rule, Constantine looked at Rome and saw a city that was, in the most practical sense, in the wrong place, far from the empire's most productive provinces, far from its most threatened frontiers, far from the trade routes that generated its wealth. The great agricultural surplus that fed the empire came from Egypt and North Africa. The silk and spice routes that enriched it ran through Asia Minor and Syria. The frontiers that most needed defending lay along the Danube and the Euphrates. And there, at the junction of Europe and Asia, on a narrow peninsula jutting into the strait that connected the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, sat a small city called Byzantium. It had been there since the 7th century BCE, a Greek colony. Strategically positioned, quietly prosperous, historically unimpressive, Constantine looked at it and saw something else. He saw a city that controlled the most important choke point in the known world. Every ship passing between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean had to pass through the Bosphorus. Every land route connecting Europe and Asia ran through this peninsula. Whoever held Byzantium held a key to the commerce of two continents. He broke ground on his new capital in 324 CE. He called it New Rome. The world would call it Constantinople. The construction was extraordinary in its scale and speed. Within 6 years, Constantine had built a city that rivaled the old one, stripping temples and monuments from across the empire to decorate it. Building a new Senate house, a new hippodrome, new palaces, new churches, creating the grain dole that would feed the city's population for centuries. He made Christianity the empire's favorite religion. The new capital was built with churches at its center rather than temples. Constantine died in 337 CE. Baptized on his deathbed, he had given the Roman world a new capital, a new religion, and a new direction. He had not solved the empire's fundamental structural problem. It was still too large, too diverse, and too expensive to govern as a single unit. That problem would reassert itself almost immediately after his death. But the city he had built on the Bosphorus would prove more durable than anyone in 337 CE could have foreseen. More durable than empires. More durable, nearly, than time itself. Asterism. The inheritance. Roman law. Greek language. Christian soul. 337 to 527 CE. On September 4, 476 CE, a barbarian chieftain named Odoacer forced the last Western Roman emperor, a teenage boy named Romulus Augustulus, to abdicate. Sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, and declared himself king of Italy. In Constantinople, the Emperor Zeno received the news. He filed it, and the largest, wealthiest, most powerful city in the Roman world continued on with its business as if nothing of particular consequence had occurred. This is worth pausing on, because we treat 476 CE as an epical date, the fall of Rome, the end of the ancient world, the beginning of the Dark Ages. But from Constantinople's perspective, nothing had fallen. The Roman Empire was fine. It was right there. The western half had been administered by a series of useless boy emperors for a generation, had been looted by Visigoths and Vandals, and had gradually become ungovernable. But the real empire, the Eastern Empire, with the money and the armies and the grain and the trade routes, was intact and functioning. The civilization we call Byzantine was, in its own understanding, simply the Roman Empire continuing normally. It would hold this self-conception for the entirety of its existence. Byzantine emperors called themselves Basileus ton Romaean, Emperor of the Romans, until the very last one died fighting on the walls in 1453. They never considered themselves the inheritors of Rome. They considered themselves Rome. What made the Eastern Empire so much more durable than its Western counterpart? Begin with geography. Constantinople's position on the Bosphorus was not merely strategically advantageous, for the military technology of the age. It was essentially impregnable, surrounded on three sides by water, sealed on the west by the Theodosian walls, a triple line of defenses built under Theodosius II. 20 kilometers of layered walls and towers and ditches. The city repelled every attacker for 1,000 years. Then economics. The Bosphorus was the greatest toll road in the ancient world, taxing every ship that passed between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, generating wealth that funded armies and building projects the cash-starved Western Empire could never have sustained. Then administration. Roman law. Roman bureaucratic practice. Roman record-keeping, inherited. Preserved. Conducted over time in Greek rather than Latin. Infused with theological subtlety, but remaining fundamentally functional in ways that Western governance simply was not through the centuries of migration and collapse that followed. The city at its height housed 500,000 to 1 million inhabitants when London was a market town of 15,000. Its hippodrome seated 100,000 spectators. Its forums and colonnaded streets ran for miles. An ambassador from the court of Liutprand of Cremona who visited in 968 CE wrote that he felt he had arrived in paradise. He was not simply being rhetorical. He was trying to convey a reality for which his readers had no adequate frame of reference. The survival was not effortless. The 5th and 6th centuries brought theological controversy so intense it generated riots and palace coups. Migrations that pushed Germanic peoples deep into what had been Roman territory. Plague and earthquake and economic contraction. But through all of it, the city endured. The walls held. The grain ships arrived. The bureaucrats filed their reports in precise Greek script. The emperors were crowned in the Hagia Sophia, anointed by the patriarch, invested with regalia connecting each of them, symbolically and legally, to Augustus Caesar. What it needed, in this 6th century, was someone capable of taking this collection of Roman institutions and Greek culture and Christian theology and forging it into something distinctly and permanently its own. A man whose reach was large enough to be visionary and whose will was hard enough to actually execute. That man became emperor at 45 and spent his entire reign trying to restore a world that no longer existed. In doing so, he built something that would last far longer than the world he was trying to restore. His name was Justinian, and before we talk about him, we need to talk about the woman who made him possible. Asterism. The Bear Keeper's Daughter. Justinian and Theodora remake the world. 527 to 565 CE. Theodora was born around 497 CE to a family so far outside the Byzantine aristocracy that she should not, by any ordinary calculation, have been in the same room as an emperor. Her father was a bear keeper at the hippodrome, the man responsible for training the bears used in spectacle entertainment. When he died, her mother remarried hoping the new husband would inherit the position. He did not. The family was left destitute. What happened to Theodora in the years that followed is described by our primary source, the historian Procopius, who despised her, in terms so scandalous that modern historians debate how much is accurate. What is not disputed is that she became an actress and mime performer, a profession carrying enormous social stigma in Byzantine society, and that she was also, by every account, possessed of an intelligence and a force of personality that turned every room she entered into a space organized around her. Justinian, nephew of the reigning emperor Justin I and already the most powerful man at court outside the emperor himself, met her and was immediately, apparently, lost. He changed the laws prohibiting marriage between men of senatorial rank and women of the theatrical profession. Then he married her. The Byzantine aristocracy was horrified. None of it mattered. In 527 CE, when Justin I died and Justinian became emperor, Theodora became empress, and within 5 years, she would demonstrate in a single hour that she was possibly the more capable ruler of the two. January 13, 532 CE. The Nika revolt had begun as a riot between the blue and green factions, the organized political and sporting groups that controlled the hippodrome, and within days had become something far more dangerous, a coordinated uprising of the aristocracy, using street violence as its vehicle. Now demanding Justinian's abdication, the city was burning, the palace was surrounded, senior advisors were telling the emperor it was time to flee. Justinian was preparing to do so. Then Theodora spoke. Her speech has been preserved by Procopius, who hated her, which means it is probably substantially accurate because he had no motive to make her sound impressive. She told the assembled generals and ministers that she had no intention of fleeing, that the imperial purple was a fine burial shroud, that a man who had been emperor could not survive as an exile, better to die in the palace than live as a fugitive, and that if they wished to flee, the ships were in the harbor. Nobody fled. Justinian sent his general Belisarius into the hippodrome. 30,000 people died in the violence that followed. The Nika revolt was extinguished in an afternoon. Theodora co-ruled the empire in the most literal sense for the rest of her life. Imperial decrees were issued in both their names. Foreign dignitaries conducted diplomacy with her independently. She died in 548 CE, 14 years before her husband. And Justinian's remaining years have the quality of a man completing what they had started together but without the animating intelligence that had directed it. What they built together was extraordinary in scope. Justinian's renovation of the empire, his renovatio imperii, was the recovery of the lost western provinces. He had the general to do it, Belisarius, arguably the finest military commander of the age, who destroyed the Vandal kingdom in North Africa in 533 CE in a campaign of stunning speed and was in Carthage within a year. Italy took longer. The Gothic Wars dragged on for nearly 20 years, devastating the peninsula, but by 554 CE, the map of the Mediterranean looked almost Roman again. Italy, North Africa, southern Spain, Egypt, Syria, Asia Minor, Greece, reunited under a single ruler for the first time in generations. The legal legacy was, in some ways, even more enduring. Justinian commissioned a comprehensive codification of Roman law, the Corpus Juris Civilis, that organized centuries of accumulated legal decisions into a coherent, usable system. This code, completed between 529 and 534 CE, became the foundation of legal systems across Europe for the next 15 centuries. The civil law tradition governing most of continental Europe today, and through European colonialism most of the world, traces its origins directly to Justinian's commission. And then there is Hagia Sophia. The original church had burned in the Nika revolt. Justinian ordered it rebuilt on a scale that announced, to anyone who saw it, that God was on the side of his empire. The architects Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus designed something that had never been built before, a central dome 183 feet high, appearing to float above the main space on a ring of 40 windows that flooded the interior with light. When Justinian entered the completed church on December 27, 537 CE, he reportedly stood in the nave and said, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." Whether he actually said it, the sentiment was accurate. Hagia Sophia would stand as the largest enclosed space in the world for nearly 1,000 years. Justinian died in 565 CE. Aged 83, his empire was larger than any Byzantine ruler before or after him would hold. It was also exhausted, economically strained, theologically divided, and about to face enemies from every direction simultaneously. His successors would lose most of what he had reconquered within 2 generations. But the legal code, the church, the idea of what Byzantium could be at its greatest, those things were more durable than territory. Far more durable than any of the men who followed him could know. Asterism. The fire that would not die. Plague, conquest, and the art of surviving everything, 565 to 867 CE. The 3 centuries that followed Justinian's death are the most underappreciated in Byzantine history, not because nothing happened, but because what happened is the story of an empire being stripped of everything except the will to continue. And continuing anyway. Begin with the plague. The plague of Justinian arrived in Constantinople in 541 CE, the first pandemic of bubonic plague in recorded history. At its peak it was killing, according to ancient sources, 10,000 people a day in the city alone. Modern estimates are more cautious but still extraordinary. Perhaps 25 to 50 million dead across the Mediterranean world over the century in which it recurred in waves. Byzantine Egypt, which provided much of the empire's grain and tax revenue, lost perhaps half its population. The army shrank, tax revenues collapsed, the economic foundations of Justinian's great reconquest dissolved. Simultaneously, on the eastern frontier, a war with Sassanid Persia was draining the remaining resources for decades. Emperor Heraclius, who came to power in 610 CE after a period of civil war and near collapse, found himself ruling an empire that Persia was systematically dismembering. By 619 CE the Persians had occupied Egypt, Syria, Palestine, and Anatolia. Persian cavalry were camped across the Bosphorus from Constantinople itself. What Heraclius did over the following decade is one of the most remarkable military campaigns in history. starting from a position that looked hopeless. Rebuilding the Byzantine army, developing a strategy of deep penetration into Persian territory rather than defending the frontier. And in campaigns between 622 and 628 CE driving deep into the Persian heartland. Destroying their great fire temple, recovering the true cross from Jerusalem, and forcing a peace that restored all the lost territories. It was a staggering achievement. It was also completely beside the point. While Heraclius was destroying Persia, something was happening in the Arabian Peninsula that neither empire had noticed or taken seriously. A merchant and prophet named Muhammad had unified the Arab tribes under a new religion and a new political order. When Muhammad died in 632 CE, his successors launched military campaigns of an intensity and ideological cohesion that neither exhausted superpower could withstand. By 636 CE the Arabs had destroyed the Byzantine army in Syria at the Battle of Yarmouk. By 642 CE they had taken Egypt. By 698 CE, all of North Africa. By 711 CE, they were in Spain. The Byzantine Empire lost, in the space of one human lifetime, the territories at the heart of its wealth and identity for 3 centuries. What saved Constantinople was a combination of its walls, its navy, and one invention that may be the most consequential secret weapon in medieval military history. Greek fire. The formula has been lost. We know what it did. It burned on the surface of water. Could be projected through tubes on Byzantine warships. And could not be put out by anything available to the Arab fleet. When the Arab navy attempted to take Constantinople in 674 CE, and again in 717 CE, Greek fire turned their fleets into floating pyres. The city held. The survival came at a price. The empire that emerged from the Arab conquests was fundamentally different from Justinian's empire, smaller, more coherent, more purely Greek and Christian in its culture, more intensely focused on the defense of what remained. Heraclius had already changed the official language of administration from Latin to Greek. His successors reorganized the army and provincial administration into the theme system, turning military commanders into provincial governors responsible for raising troops to defend their own territory. A leaner, harder, more efficient instrument of survival. And then, as if plague and conquest were not sufficient, the empire turned on itself. The iconoclast controversy, the dispute over whether the veneration of religious images was legitimate Christian practice or prohibited idolatry, consumed Byzantine political and religious life for over a century. From 726 CE to 843 CE, emperors ordered images destroyed, popes condemned the iconoclasts as heretics, monks and abbesses were tortured or exiled for refusing to abandon their icons. In 843 CE, after one final iconoclast revival and defeat, the question was settled permanently. The Orthodox Church celebrates the Sunday of the triumph of orthodoxy to this day. Byzantium had survived the plague, the Persians, the Arabs, and its own religious civil war. It emerged smaller, harder, and more distinctly itself than it had been in Justinian's time, and in the 9th century. Against every probability, it was about to flower again. Asterism. The Golden City. The richest place on earth and the army that blinded 15,000 men. 867–1025 CE. In the year 867 CE, a Macedonian peasant named Basil murdered the emperor in his bedroom and took the throne. This is not an unusual beginning for a Byzantine reign. Assassination was a recognized if not formally approved pathway to power. What was unusual was what Basil and his successors made of the opportunity. The Macedonian dynasty, founded in blood, presided over the greatest cultural and military flowering in Byzantine history since Justinian. The military expansion was real and dramatic. By the mid-10th century, Byzantine armies had pushed the frontiers further east than they had been since before the Arab conquests. Cilicia recovered. Cyprus recovered. Parts of Syria recovered. And in 969 CE the great city of Antioch, held by Arab rulers for 3 centuries, taken back. The Bulgarian Empire was crushed in a campaign of such systematic brutality that the man who conducted it earned a name that tells you everything about his methods: Basil II. The Bulgar Slayer. The story of Basil and the Bulgarians is worth telling in detail, because it illustrates something essential about Byzantine power at its peak. In 1014 CE, Basil finally cornered a Bulgarian army at the Battle of Claydon. The battle was decisive. When it was over, he had approximately 15,000 prisoners. He blinded them, all of them, every 100 men. He left one man with one eye to lead the others home. When Tsar Samuel saw his army returning, 15,000 blind men, led by the few who could still see, he died of shock. Or so the sources say. Whether shock was literally the cause or simply the most satisfying explanation available, Samuel died within days. The Bulgarian Empire submitted to Byzantine rule. This is Byzantine power at its most extreme expression, but it should be placed alongside the other things that define the Macedonian period: the extraordinary cultural production, the scholarship, the art, the theology, to understand that this was not a civilization defined by brutality. It was a civilization comfortable with brutality when it was strategically necessary, and equally comfortable with sublime aesthetic achievement when the conditions allowed. The same emperor who blinded 15,000 men also funded the production of manuscripts that are among the most beautiful objects ever made by human hands. Economically, Macedonian Byzantium was incomprehensible in its wealth to contemporary Western observers. The city's population of 500,000 to 1 million people, living in a built environment of theaters, forums, churches, palaces, and markets, represented a concentration of civilization that the 10th century West literally could not process. Byzantine silk was a state monopoly. The purple dye reserved for imperial garments was forbidden to any other ruler on earth. Gold solidus coins, struck to precise weights unchanged since Constantine, were the dominant international currency from England to China. The ambassador Ludeprand of Cremona, visiting in 968, wrote that he felt he had arrived in paradise. He was not exaggerating. He was trying to describe a reality his readers had no preparation for. The Emperor Constantine VII Porphyrogenitos, born in the purple, supervised the compilation of encyclopedias of military strategy, agriculture, medicine, and veterinary science, and wrote comprehensive manuals on Byzantine court ceremonial and the administration of the empire. These texts survive. It was also during this period that Byzantine missionaries brought Christianity, and with it the Greek alphabet, Greek literary culture, and Byzantine political models, to the Slavic peoples of Eastern Europe. Saints Cyril and Methodius, who created the script that evolved into Cyrillic, were Byzantine monks working under imperial sponsorship. Russia, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania all received their Christianity, their alphabet, their iconographic traditions, and much of their concept of legitimate political authority from Constantinople. At the peak of the Macedonian period, Constantinople was arguably the most sophisticated civilization on earth outside of Sung dynasty China. Its legal system was the most developed, its bureaucracy the most efficient, its art the most technically accomplished, its theological tradition the most intellectually rigorous. Then Basil II died in 1025 CE without a direct heir. What followed was a generation of weak emperors, factional court politics, and a series of catastrophically bad military decisions. The catastrophe had a name, a date, a place, and it was approaching from the east with a speed that Byzantine intelligence had failed to adequately register. Asterism. The wound that would not heal. One battle changes everything, 1025 to 1081 CE. The Battle of Manzikert on August 26, 1071 CE is the moment Byzantine history turns. Not the moment it ends. The empire would survive for nearly 400 more years. But the moment after which everything that came before is irreversibly over and everything that comes after is struggle. To understand why Manzikert was fatal, you need to understand what Anatolia meant. It was not simply a province. It provided roughly 70% of the empire's tax revenue, the majority of its military manpower, the agricultural plains that fed Constantinople. Without Anatolia, Byzantium was a city-state defending some Balkan territory and a handful of Greek islands. With Anatolia, it was an empire, and on that plain in eastern Turkey, on that August afternoon, the empire lost it. The Seljuk Turks, who had emerged from Central Asia in the mid-11th century, were a different kind of enemy from anything Byzantium had faced before. Not a settled civilization that could be defeated in a decisive engagement and then negotiated with, but a nomadic confederacy of extraordinary military mobility. Horse archers capable of covering distances Byzantine infantry could not match. Experienced in fluid evasive warfare that Byzantine tactical doctrine was not designed to counter. Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes assembled one of the largest Byzantine armies in generations and marched east in the summer of 1071 to force a confrontation. What happened at Manzikert was partly tactical mistakes and partly treachery within the Byzantine ranks, the details disputed by sources with competing agendas, but the outcome is not in dispute. The Byzantine army was surrounded by Seljuk cavalry employing the feigned retreat. Drawing the Byzantine infantry forward and then enveloping it, Romanos fought personally and bravely. His horse was killed under him. He continued fighting on foot. He was captured. No Byzantine emperor had been taken in battle in more than 700 years. The ransom terms Alp Arslan offered were actually quite reasonable. Romanos agreed. The Sultan released him. Then, while Romanos was making his way back to Constantinople, he discovered his court had already deposed him, crowned a rival, and arranged for his blinding. He died of his wounds shortly after. The ransom was never paid. The alliance was never honored. And the Seljuks, having defeated the field army and then watched the empire descend into civil war over the succession, simply moved into the vacuum, not in a single dramatic invasion but in a gradual infiltration. Turkoman nomads following the retreating Byzantine forces, settling in the devastated landscape, establishing control valley by valley. Within 15 years of Manzikert, Byzantium had lost most of Anatolia, not to conquest but to demographic replacement. The Turkish nomads were settling the land. They were not going to leave. The man who eventually stabilized what remained was Alexios I Komnenos, who seized the throne in 1081 CE at 30 years old, brilliant, tough, completely unsentimental, and faced with a situation that required him to make a series of pragmatic decisions with far-reaching consequences. The most consequential was a letter he wrote to Pope Urban II in 1095 CE. The letter asked for military assistance against the Turks. It described Christian pilgrims harassed on the roads to Jerusalem. It requested mercenaries, experienced soldiers who could help recover lost territory. What Urban II did with that letter was not what Alexios had in mind. The Pope called the First Crusade. Instead of the manageable contingent of mercenaries Alexios had requested, hundreds of thousands of armed pilgrims began moving through Byzantine territory toward Jerusalem. They were not allies. They were barely controllable. And the theological and cultural distance between Latin Catholicism and Greek Orthodoxy, formalized in the Great Schism of 1054, translated on the ground into mutual incomprehension and suspicion that no diplomatic skill could fully overcome. Alexios managed the First Crusade with exceptional skill, extracting oaths of loyalty from the crusade leaders and recovering some Anatolian territory as they passed through. His successors maintained a precarious balance between the Western military presence in the Levant and Byzantine interests for a century. The balance held, and then came the Fourth Crusade. And the balance, along with much else, was destroyed. Asterism. Betrayal. The allies who became the destroyers, 1096 to 1261 CE. There is a particular kind of historical wound that comes not from an enemy's malice but from an ally's combination of greed, ideology, and spectacular misjudgment. The Fourth Crusade inflicted exactly this wound on the Byzantine Empire, and its consequences would echo through the next 2.5 centuries. The Crusade of 1202 to 1204 was supposed to recapture Jerusalem. It never got close. What it accomplished instead was the conquest and sack of the largest Christian city in the world. The sequence of events that led to this outcome has the quality of a slow-motion catastrophe in which every decision made the next disaster more likely. The Crusaders needed ships. They contracted with Venice to provide them, running up a debt they could not pay. Venice, in the person of the 90-year-old but still formidably capable Doge Enrico Dandolo, offered an alternative: help Venice recover the city of Zara on the Adriatic coast. The Crusaders attacked a Catholic city. The Pope excommunicated the entire crusade. They continued anyway. Then a Byzantine prince arrived with a proposition: help restore his deposed father. Receive money to repay the Venetian debt, military support for Jerusalem, and the submission of the Orthodox Church to papal authority. The Crusaders agreed. The promises proved impossible to keep. The population would not accept Latin Church authority. The treasury was empty. The restored emperor was overthrown almost immediately. The Crusaders, camped outside the city, found themselves with nothing to show for their diversion. On April 12, 1204 CE, they attacked Constantinople, the city that had withstood Arab fleets, Bulgarian armies, and every other enemy for 9 centuries fell in a single day. The sack lasted 3 days. Medieval chroniclers, including Crusaders themselves, described it with horror. Soldiers broke into the Hagia Sophia and tore the silver from the altar screen. Horses were stabled in the nave. A prostitute was placed on the patriarch's throne. The accumulated artistic treasures of 9 centuries were looted, melted, scattered. The Byzantine historian Nikitas Choniates wrote, "These men who bear the cross of Christ on their shoulders did not shrink from wearing the mask of piety over the blackest cruelty. They did what no infidel would have done." The Crusaders established a Latin Empire of Constantinople. It would last 57 years, long enough to be a serious disruption. Not long enough to be sustainable. The Byzantine court fled to Nicaea in Asia Minor and maintained the institutions of the empire in exile. In 1261 CE, the Emperor Michael VIII Palaiologos recovered Constantinople in a surprise attack. Entering the city through a poorly defended gate, he went directly to the Hagia Sophia. He stood in the center of the nave. He wept. The empire had been restored. But what was restored was not what had existed before. Smaller, poorer, more fragile, surrounded by enemies who had learned that Constantinople's legendary impregnability was not absolute. And there was one other consequence that would prove to be among the most significant: the absolute rupture between Greek and Latin Christendom. The Orthodox population of Constantinople had watched Latin Crusaders sack their city, desecrate their most holy church, while professing to be fellow Christians. No subsequent theological negotiation could overcome the memory of 1204. When, in the 15th century, the last Byzantine emperors offered church union as the price for Western help against the Ottomans, their own population rejected it. Better to fall to the Turks, many Byzantines said, than to submit to Rome. It was not an irrational position, given what they remembered, and it would shape the choice Constantinople made when the final test came. Asterism. The last Renaissance. A civilization at its finest as it falls, 1261 to 1350 CE. The final 2 centuries of Byzantine history contain one of the more remarkable paradoxes in cultural history: an empire in political and military free fall simultaneously experiencing a flowering of intellectual and artistic achievement that would help give birth to the European Renaissance. The Palaiologan dynasty, which had restored the empire in 1261, presided over a state that was, by any military or territorial measure, declining steadily toward extinction. The recovered empire never controlled more than a fraction of what the Macedonian Empire had governed. Its tax base was diminished, its army small and frequently unreliable, its treasury chronically empty, and the Italian merchant republics, Venice and Genoa especially, had obtained such sweeping commercial privileges within Byzantine territory that they effectively controlled its maritime trade. And yet, the scholarship, the art, the theological debate, the theologian Gregory Palamas, whose doctrine of hesychasm, the practice of contemplative prayer aimed at direct experience of the divine, became the official theology of Orthodox Christianity, developed his ideas in this period. His debates with the humanist Barlaam of Calabria produced one of the most sophisticated theological exchanges in medieval history. The Byzantine humanists, Gemistos Plathen, Manuel Chrysoloras, Bessarion of Trebizond, were rediscovering Plato, editing texts, writing commentaries that returned to classical sources with a freshness and rigor absent from Western scholarship for centuries. When Chrysoloras went to Florence in 1397 CE to teach Greek, he brought with him not just linguistic instruction but an entire world of ancient texts that Italian humanists had never had direct access to. the Platonic Academy of Florence, which would produce so much of the intellectual content of the Italian Renaissance, traced its origins to Byzantine scholarship. The art of the period showed parallel qualities, a renewed interest in natural forms, in spatial depth, in the psychological expressiveness of individual faces, that looks forward to what Italian painters would develop in the following century. The frescoes at the Chora Church in Constantinople, painted in the early 14th century, demonstrate a mastery of narrative and human emotion that has clear parallels in the work of Giotto in Italy at roughly the same time. Whether this represents direct influence, independent parallel development, or some combination is a debate among art historians. What is certain is that the two traditions were in contact and that the Italian Renaissance received an enormous transfusion of Greek learning and Byzantine aesthetic sensibility at precisely the moment when it was developing its own transformative momentum. Meanwhile, the empire was dying by degrees. The Black Death of 1347 struck Constantinople as it struck the rest of the Mediterranean world, killing perhaps a third of the population. The civil wars between rival members of the Palaiologan family, 3 of them in the 14th century, weakened the empire at exactly the moment when strength was most needed. By 1400 CE, the Byzantine Empire consisted essentially of Constantinople itself, a few Aegean islands, and the despotate of the Morea in the Peloponnese. It was not so much an empire as a city-state with imperial pretensions and imperial memories, surrounded by an Ottoman state that had already absorbed everything it had once governed. And that Ottoman state was waiting, with the patience of a power that knew it had already won, for the final act. Asterism. The patient enemy. How a small tribe became the inevitable end, 1299 to 1400 CE. Around the year 1300, a small Turkoman chieftain named Osman controlled a patch of territory in northwestern Anatolia near the city of Bursa. He was one of dozens of such chieftains in the post-Seljuk landscape, a minor nuisance. The kind of border problem that good garrison management could handle. A Byzantine frontier official noting his presence would have been right about what Osman was in 1300. He would have been catastrophically wrong about what Osman's descendants would become. The Ottoman state that grew from that small principality was almost uniquely well suited to inherit the Byzantine Empire's position. By the 14th century, the Ottomans were as much heirs of the Byzantine administrative and cultural tradition as they were of the Central Asian nomadic tradition they had originated from. They absorbed Byzantine administrative practices along with Byzantine territory. They employed Greek and Armenian Christians in their bureaucracy. They understood how cities worked, how to tax agricultural production, how to manage trade routes, because they had spent 2 generations watching Byzantine institutions at close range. What they added was military discipline of a very high order, a religious ideology that motivated their soldiers, and a strategic patience that no previous enemy of Byzantium had demonstrated in quite the same way. Earlier enemies had attacked Constantinople directly and been repelled. The Ottomans took a different approach. They surrounded it. They absorbed every Byzantine territory outside the walls. They cut every supply line. They made Constantinople an island in a sea of Ottoman territory, isolated, dependent, waiting, and then waited for the moment when the siege would be conclusive rather than merely costly. Adrianople fell in 1369 and became the Ottoman capital, announced to the Christian world that the threat was no longer merely Eastern. The Battle of Kosovo in 1389 shattered the Serbian Empire, the most powerful Christian state in the Balkans, and opened the road to the Danube. Bayezid I called the Thunderbolt, blockaded Constantinople itself for 8 years from 1394 to 1402, nearly starving it into submission. Emperor Manuel II, one of the most cultured rulers in Byzantine history, traveled to the courts of France and England hoping to rouse Christendom to the city's defense. He was received with honor, with sympathy, with gifts. He returned to Constantinople with nothing useful. Constantinople was saved temporarily and almost accidentally by Timur, Tamerlane, who crushed the Ottoman army at the Battle of Ankara in 1402, captured Bayezid himself, and triggered a decade of Ottoman civil war. The siege was lifted. The city had a generation to breathe. The Ottoman civil war was resolved by 1413. The expansion resumed, and the grandson of the man who had blockaded Constantinople in 1394 came to the throne in 1451 with one consuming ambition: to finish what his grandfather had begun. Mehmed II was 21 years old. He would give himself, and history, a single title: Fatih, the Conqueror. Asterism. Men without options. The last emperors face what cannot be avoided. 1400 to 1452 CE. Constantine the 11th Palaiologos became emperor in 1449. He ruled a city, not an empire, Constantinople, a few Aegean islands, and the despotate of the Morea in Greece. The army he could field for the defense of Constantinople numbered perhaps 7,000 men. The population had fallen from the hundreds of thousands it once contained to perhaps 50,000. The great empty spaces within the walls increasingly given over to gardens and fields. He knew what was coming. Everyone in Constantinople knew what was coming. Mehmed II had made no secret of his intentions. When he became sultan in 1451, he almost immediately began construction of a fortress on the European side of the Bosphorus, Rumeli Hisari, alongside the existing fortress on the Asian side. Together they controlled the strait completely. Constantinople's maritime lifeline could be cut at will. Constantine spent the 3 years before the siege in a sustained, ultimately futile effort to find help. He sent appeals to Pope Nicholas V, to the King of Aragon, to Venice, to Genoa, to the King of Hungary. The Pope offered assistance on one condition: the union of the Orthodox and Catholic churches, submission of orthodoxy to Rome's authority. Constantine agreed, reluctantly. With no genuine conviction his people would accept it. The Union of Florence was published in Constantinople in December 1452. The Grand Duke Loukas Notaras, the most powerful man in the city after the emperor, reportedly said, "I would rather see the turban of the Turk in the middle of the city than the mitre of a Latin cardinal." He was not alone. The memory of 1204 was 150 years old. But it was not forgotten. The practical assistance that was supposed to follow the union proved minimal. Venice eventually sent a few ships. Genoa sent a nobleman named Giovanni Giustiniani Longo with 700 soldiers. That was essentially it. Constantine organized his defense with what he had. He distributed 7,000 defenders along 14 miles of walls. He stretched a great chain across the entrance to the Golden Horn to prevent the Ottoman fleet from entering the harbor. He stockpiled food and water. He made arrangements for the city's churches. In January 1453, intelligence confirmed that Mehmed's army would move in the spring. He sent a final dispatch to his ambassador in Venice: "The Turk is moving against us with a great force. We can expect nothing from the west unless God intervenes. But we shall do our duty." The ambassador filed the dispatch. The Venetian Senate debated sending assistance. By the time the debate concluded, it was too late. On April 2, 1453, the Ottoman army arrived outside the walls of Constantinople. It numbered between 60 and 80,000 men. Mehmed II planted his scarlet tent directly in front of the great land walls. And the siege began. Asterism. 55 days. The siege that ended a millennium, April to May 1453. The siege lasted 55 days. That number understates how extraordinary the defense was. 7,000 men held 14 miles of walls against 60 to 80,000 for nearly 2 months. They did it because of the walls themselves, which were the finest defensive fortification in the world, because of Giovanni Giustiniani, who proved to be one of the finest defensive commanders of his era, and because Mehmed II faced a tactical problem that had defeated every previous Ottoman attempt on the city. The problem was the Theodosian walls. Built in the 5th century and maintained for 1,000 years. They were not simply a wall but a system, an outer moat. An outer wall with towers. A terrace. An inner wall taller and thicker than the outer one, with towers projecting forward to provide flanking fire. Any attacker who breached the outer wall was caught in the terrace, exposed to fire from the inner wall's towers. The walls had never been successfully stormed. Mehmed's solution was the cannon. He had contracted with a Hungarian engineer named Urban, who had first offered his services to Constantine, been told Constantinople could not afford him, and then gone to Mehmed to cast the largest bombard ever built. Urban's cannon was about 8 meters long, required 60 oxen and 400 men to transport, and could fire a ball weighing over 600 kilograms. It could fire 7 times a day. Each shot could be heard 15 kilometers away. The cannon reduced sections of the outer wall to rubble within days. The defenders, working through the night after each day's bombardment, filled the breaches with barrels of earth and timber, improvised repairs that managed to keep the walls functional even as they were being methodically destroyed. The pattern held for weeks: bombardment during the day, desperate repair at night, bombardment again at dawn. On April 22, Ottoman sailors hauled 70 ships overland on wooden sledges, across a hill behind the Genoese colony of Galata and into the Golden Horn behind the chain. The city was now threatened from the water as well as the land. Constantine moved his limited reserves to defend the harbor, thinning the land walls further. The mathematical problem had no solution. As May progressed, the mood inside Constantinople shifted from determined resistance toward something more spiritual. People spent their nights in churches. The emperor attended liturgy daily. A legend circulated that on the night before the final assault, a strange light was seen playing around the dome of the Hagia Sophia. Those who saw it interpreted it as the Holy Spirit departing the city. On May 21, Mehmed offered terms. The city could surrender. The population would be spared. Constantine could leave safely. Constantine's response was essentially what you would expect from a man who had decided, long before this moment, how the story would end. He said he was prepared to make peace and pay any tribute within his means. But he could not surrender the city. Constantinople was not his to surrender. It belonged to his people. On May 26, Mehmed held a council of war. He decided the assault would come on May 29. He gave his army 3 days of sanctioned plunder. Whatever the soldiers took was theirs. On the evening of May 28, Constantine XI Palaiologos attended a final service in the Hagia Sophia. Every lamp and candle in the church was lit. The liturgy was sung in full. When it was over, he embraced his closest companions and asked their forgiveness. Then he rode to the walls to inspect the defenders for the last time. He was seen there. Shortly before midnight, he would not be seen again with certainty. Asterism. The morning of May 29, 1453. The end of the ancient world. The attack began in the early hours of the morning. Mehmed sent his irregular troops first, the Bashi Bazouks. Undisciplined auxiliary soldiers, expendable, they attacked across the moat and into the ruined outer walls in waves. Absorbing fire, exhausting the defenders, gaining nothing. For 2 hours they came. And for 2 hours the defenders held them. And when they finally withdrew they left behind enough dead to fill the moat. Then came the Anatolian regular infantry. Trained soldiers, better equipped, more disciplined, they pushed forward into the breaches, reached the barriers the defenders had constructed from barrels and timber. And for a time it seemed as if the line might hold. Justiniani was everywhere, moving along the wall, organizing the defense, appearing at every threatened point. Every observer, Byzantine and Ottoman alike, acknowledged what his presence meant. The defense of the land walls was largely his achievement. Then, sometime in the hour before dawn, Justiniani was wounded. The sources disagree on the details: a crossbow bolt, a cannon fragment, some other projectile. What they agree on is the consequence. He told Constantine he needed to be taken to his ship for treatment. Constantine, by some accounts, urged him to stay, to hold the wall a little longer. Justiniani left. The psychological effect on the defenders was immediate. They saw their captain being carried from the walls. The Genoese soldiers who had come with him began to waver. A gate in the inner wall was opened to let Justiniani through, and Ottoman soldiers who had reached the terrace saw it and poured through. Simultaneously, a small postern gate on the northern section, the Kirkoporta, had apparently been left unlocked in the chaos of the night. A small group of Ottoman soldiers found it, entered, and raised their banners on the tower above. The defenders, seeing Ottoman flags inside the walls, believed the city had fallen. Some fled, others lost the will to hold their positions. The line broke. What followed in the city itself was hours of violence and plunder. Mehmed had promised his soldiers 3 days. He would shorten this to 1 when it became clear that systematic destruction was too valuable a city to permit. But on that first morning the soldiers who entered Constantinople took what they found. 10,000 civilians who had sheltered in the Hagia Sophia were taken as slaves. The streets of the city that had been the center of the Christian world for 11 centuries ran with blood. Constantine the 11th, according to every account, died fighting. The precise circumstances are unknown because no one who was with him at the last moment survived to tell the story in any document that has been preserved. He had torn off his imperial insignia so that he would not be recognized and continued fighting as a common soldier. His body was never definitively identified. The Ottomans later claimed to have recognized him by the eagles embroidered on his boots. He was the last emperor of the Romans. Mehmed II entered Constantinople in the early afternoon. He rode through streets being looted by his soldiers. He went directly to the Hagia Sophia. He dismounted. He took a handful of earth and poured it over his head, a gesture of humility before God. Then he entered the church. He stood in the center of the nave and looked up at the dome that had floated above this space for 916 years, the dome under which every Byzantine emperor had been crowned, beneath which the entire history of a civilization had unfolded from its golden age to this final afternoon. He ordered it converted to a mosque. He ordered the mosaics plastered over. He ordered the muezzin to call the prayer. But he also ordered no destruction. The building would stand. The Roman Empire, which had existed in some form since 27 BCE, which had given the Western world its law and its concept of political authority, which had adopted Christianity and carried it across 3 continents, which had been the center of civilization for 11 centuries in its eastern form, was over. The date was May 29, 1453. The last emperor had no tomb. The last prayer had already been sung. Asterism. What they left behind. The empire that died so the modern world could live. On the night of May 29, 1453, ships left the harbor of Constantinople in the darkness. They carried scholars, monks, and people who had been copying manuscripts in the libraries of Constantinople for decades and had had the foresight, or the fortune, to load their life's work onto boats before the walls fell. They carried the physical heritage of Byzantine intellectual civilization, manuscripts of Plato, Aristotle, Thucydides, Euclid, Ptolemy, and dozens of other ancient authors that Western Europe had not seen in readable form for centuries. They sailed mostly to Italy, Venice, Padua, Florence, Rome, and when they arrived, they brought with them not just texts but the knowledge of how to read them. Greek scholars who could teach the language, explain the context, situate these texts in the tradition of inquiry that Byzantine scholarship had preserved and elaborated for 11 centuries. The Italian Renaissance was already underway before the fall of Constantinople, but the arrival of Byzantine scholars and their manuscripts provided it with a transfusion of energy and material that is impossible to overstate. Cardinal Bessarion, a Greek churchman who had converted to Catholicism and become a powerful figure in Rome, bequeathed his enormous library of Greek manuscripts to Venice, forming the nucleus of what is now the Bibliotheca Marciana, one of the world's great libraries. The Greek texts that Erasmus edited, that Thomas More read, that the reformers of the Reformation quoted, these passed through Byzantine hands on their way from the ancient world to the modern one. The Cyrillic alphabet, today the writing system of more than 250 million people across Russia, Bulgaria, Serbia, and other Slavic nations, was created by Byzantine missionaries in the 9th century. The Orthodox Christianity that defines the spiritual and cultural life of those nations, their iconographic tradition, their liturgical practice, their theological understanding, came from Constantinople. The Russian czars who called Moscow the Third Rome and themselves heirs of the Byzantine emperors were making a claim that was not simply grandiose. They were the most politically influential inheritors of a tradition that Byzantium had transmitted to the Slavic world over 5 centuries. The legal tradition of Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis contributed to the development of civil law traditions across continental Europe that remain the basis of legal systems from France to Japan. Every time a civil law country distinguishes between public and private law, every time a contract is enforced on principles traceable to Roman jurisprudence, the ghost of Justinian's commission is present in the room. And Hagia Sophia, the building is still there. It has been a mosque. a museum, and since 2020 a mosque again. Its dome still floats above the nave on its ring of 40 windows. The afternoon light still moving across the marble floor as it has moved for nearly 1500 years. When Sinan, the greatest Ottoman architect, built the Süleymaniye Mosque in the 16th century, he was working in conscious dialogue with the Hagia Sophia that stood a few hundred meters away. When Christopher Wren designed St. Paul's Cathedral in London, he was working in a tradition of dome construction that traces back through Italian Renaissance intermediaries to what Anthemius and Isidore built for Justinian in 537 CE. Every great domed interior in the Western world owes something, however remotely, to a commission given by a man who wanted to surpass Solomon. The question this video opened with was, what does it take for an empire to survive 1,000 years? The answer, across 11 centuries of Byzantine history, is the same answer it always is. Institutions that outlast individuals, ideas that outlast institutions, buildings that outlast ideas, and the willingness, in every generation, of enough people to believe that what they are defending is worth the cost of defending it. Constantine the 11th believed it. He died for it, on a wall that could not be held, in a city that could not be saved, carrying a tradition that could not be permitted to die without a fight. The empire fell, the tradition did not. You are reading this in an alphabet descended from the Greek that Byzantine scholars preserved. You are living in a legal tradition shaped by Roman law that Byzantine lawyers codified. You are looking at buildings whose architectural vocabulary passes through Byzantine hands. The Renaissance that produced the scientific revolution that produced the modern world received a crucial transfusion from the scholars who fled Constantinople in the spring of 1453. The Roman Empire that refused to die finally died on a Tuesday in May. 1123 years after Constantine first broke ground on its capital. But it left more behind than it is usually given credit for. And the world we live in is, in ways both visible and invisible, a world that Byzantium helped to make. The ships that left Constantinople on the night of May 29, 1453 carried the inheritance of 1100 years west into a world ready to receive it. What those scholars brought to Florence and Rome and Venice would become the Renaissance. What the Renaissance would become is the world you are reading this in right now. Byzantium is not a footnote. It is a foundation. And there are more foundations like it. More stories from the civilizations that shaped the world we inherited without fully understanding where it came from. World Saga exists to find those stories and tell them completely. The Ottomans who inherited Constantinople are next. Then Rome itself. Then the empires that the Western world has spent 3 centuries trying to understand and still hasn't fully reckoned with. If this video was worth your time, subscribe, so the next saga finds you the moment it is ready. If one moment in this story surprised you, one decision, one figure, one night in May that landed differently than you expected, leave it in the comments. Those conversations are the reason this work exists. And if this video earned a like, it matters more than you might think. This is World Saga, the story of humanity, one empire at a time. I will see you in the next one.